I still remember the way those overhead lights burned against my skin that afternoon. Bright as judgment itself, the air inside the regional taste fest smelled of butter, sugar, and nerves. Every contestant had their smile fixed tight, but mine kept trembling. I had spent the morning baking with hands that wouldn't stay still, whispering a prayer over every swirl of crust. It wasn't just pie to me, it was a piece of my mama's voice. Something she'd left behind, so her daughters would never forget where love begins. When the announcer called out the finalists, the room clapped so loud my heart lost its rhythm. I stood there in my yellow dress and worn flats, flour on my wrist like a scar. The host grinned into the microphone, his voice rich and polished. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our top entry. Miss Tasha Rose and her original Sunday Mercy pie. My chest went hollow. I watched as Tasha stepped forward, smile glittering under the lights. White apron spotless, every braid in place. Reporters snapped pictures, the judges nodded. I could hear her thanking them, hear her saying words that used to be mine. "This recipe's been in my family for generations," she said, sweet as icing. And the crowd gasped in admiration. I didn't move, couldn't. All I could do was stare at that pie sitting on the table, my pie. My mama's pie, the same pattern on the crust I had taught Tasha 2 months ago. Right in my own kitchen. The same soft crumble, the same scent of nutmeg and mercy. It was like watching someone steal my heartbeat and serve it on fine china. One of the judges leaned toward another, whispering. I saw their mouths move, not their words. And right then, I felt something old wake up inside me, something fierce but quiet. I'd spent most of my life swallowing my feelings like dry bread. But that moment, I knew if I stayed silent again, I'd never taste peace. When the host asked the judges to share their thoughts, I finally took a breath. The oldest judge, a man with silver hair and kind eyes, cut another slice from Tashia's pie. He chewed slow, thoughtful, then looked across the room, right at me. "Miss Ora Mae," he said gently, "didn't you bring something similar to the Harvest Festival back in '97? The whole hall turned. The cameras swiveled. Tasha's smile stiffened. And me, I felt my pulse in my ears. I opened my mouth, but the first words came out like a whisper. "I did, sir. Only mine wasn't called original." A murmur ran through the audience. Someone gasped loud enough to echo. The host blinked, not sure whether to smile or stop the show. Tasha laughed, too high, too forced. "It's just coincidence," she said quickly. "Lots of folks bake pies, same ingredients, same—" The judge raised a hand. "Coincidence can be a mighty curious thing," he said. "Because I remember that flavor. And I remember whose hands made it." He turned back to me, his eyes soft but searching. "Miss Ora Mae, I'd like you to tell us where that recipe came from." Now every eye was on me. Every flash from the cameras lit my face like lightning. I could hear my own breath. I thought about my mama's voice, the way she used to hum while rolling dough, the way she'd say, "Love's in the patience, girl, not the sugar." I steadied my voice. "It came from my mama, sir. She called it Sunday Mercy Pie because no matter how hard the week was, mercy always rose on Sunday." A hush spread across the room. Even the sound guy froze with his hand on the board. Tasha shifted beside the table, her bracelet clinking against the glass dish. That's sweet," she muttered. "But anyone can say—" "I can prove it," I said softly. "But maybe proof ain't even the point. Maybe it's about telling the truth when someone else decides your silence is convenient." The crowd didn't know whether to clap or breathe. I could feel Aunt Shine somewhere behind me, her voice in my head whispering, "Stand tall, girl. Truth's the only spice that never spoils." For a second, I almost stepped back. I could have let it slide, saved the scene, saved my pride. But then I saw Marcus, my boy, standing near the exit in his little church shoes, watching me with those big brown eyes. And I thought, if I let this woman steal my mama's recipe, what lesson am I teaching my child? The youngest judge spoke next. "Miss Rose," he said to Tasha, "where did you say you learned this?" Tasha blinked. "From my grandmother," she said too fast. "She used to make it every Easter." He nodded slowly. "That's so? Because Miss Ora Mae here just described the exact story written on the old contest archives from '97, same title, same name. That's some powerful coincidence." I watched Tashia's eyes dart from face to face. She smiled again, smaller now, her lipstick trembling. Well, maybe she's mistaken. Maybe it's just similar. And the judge turned back to me. Miss Ora Mae, would you care to share a slice of your pie? I think the crowd deserves to taste both. The audience applauded softly, uncertain. My hands shook as I lifted the foil from my dish. Steam curled up like prayer smoke. I cut one piece, then another, placing them before the judges. The smell filled the room, brown sugar, butter, and thyme. The head judge took a bite, eyes closing slow. A moment later, he smiled. This, he said quietly, tastes like memory. That line hung in the air like gospel. Tasha's jaw tightened. I saw her shoulders stiffen, her hands curling behind her back, and for a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the host cleared his throat. Well, folks, I think our judges may need a few minutes to deliberate. He tried to sound cheerful, but his voice trembled. Cameras flashed again. The crowd buzzed with whispers, my name on some lips, hers on others. I took a small step back, my knees weak, my chest heavy with a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I didn't want to destroy her. I just wanted my mama's name honored. But sometimes justice don't come soft. It comes loud, under lights that don't blink. The judges rose from their seats and disappeared behind the curtain. The host filled the silence with chatter about sponsors and raffle tickets, but nobody listened. Everyone kept watching me. I could feel their curiosity crawling across my skin like static. A woman in the front row whispered to her friend, "That's the lady from the diner, isn't it?" "Yes," the other said. "She makes the best cobbler in town." Their voices reached me, and I lowered my eyes. Pride felt heavy when you weren't used to holding it. Tasia stepped closer, her perfume sharp, her smile gone. "You trying to embarrass me?" she hissed under her breath. I looked at her, calm as I could. "You embarrassed yourself, sugar." She flinched like I'd slapped her, then spun away, muttering something I couldn't hear. And right then, a soft voice whispered from behind me. It was Aunt Shine. "Don't move, May. Let truth do the talking." So I stood there, hands folded, eyes fixed on that empty judge's table. The host tried to regain control, his voice bouncing nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, while our judges make their final decision, let's all remember this competition is about love and tradition, not rivalry." But love felt far away in that moment. Tradition was trembling on the edge of being forgotten, and I was the only one still holding on. I thought of my mama again, of how she used to say recipes were a kind of scripture, stories written in sugar and salt. I whispered to myself, "Don't let them rewrite yours." That's when I heard footsteps returning from behind the curtain, steady and slow, like the sound of a verdict. When those footsteps echoed out from behind the curtain, the whole hall seemed to hold its breath. Every shuffle of shoe on the polished floor sounded like thunder. The judges walked back to their table, faces unreadable, clipboards pressed to their chests. The host's grin looked painted on now. He cleared his throat once, twice. The head judge, a tall man with silver hair and a navy suit sharp enough to cut through tension, took the microphone. "Thank you for your patience, everyone. We've reached a decision." I could feel sweat gathering at the back of my neck. My heart was steady but loud. Beside me, Tasia fixed her gaze on the judges, chin high, pretending nothing was wrong. I kept my hands clasped at my waist. Mama used to tell me, "If you can't control the world, control your fingers." The judge began. "Every contestant here today has shown remarkable talent and dedication. But sometimes, in the world of tradition and taste, truth comes baked into the crust." The crowd stirred. He turned toward me. "Miss Ora Mae, we'd like you to join us up here." My knees wobbled, but I walked to the front, each step heavier than the last. The lights washed over me, bright and hot. The murmur of the audience blurred into one long hum. The judge gestured to the two pies sitting side by side, the one under Tasia's name and mine. "These," he said, "tell two stories, one about presentation, the other about heart. The question is, which one speaks the truth?" He motioned for me to stand beside my dish. I did. The smell of brown sugar floated between us. "Would you mind telling us," he said softly, "what makes your recipe yours?" I looked down at the pie, at the flaky edges where I'd pressed my mama's old fork pattern. "It's not the ingredients," I said. "It's the mercy. My mama used to say, no matter who you feed, feed them gentle. This pie's the only way I know how to do that." The crowd went still again. One of the judges, a woman with a red scarf, swallowed hard. "That's beautiful," she whispered, not realizing her mic was live. Then the head judge turned to Tasia. "Miss Rose, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Tasia's face was pale under the stage lights. Her lips quivered, but she smiled anyway. I already told you. My grandmother taught me this recipe, years ago." The judge tilted his head. "You sure it wasn't borrowed from a kind neighbor who trusted you?" Her mouth opened, closed. The audience began to murmur again, louder this time. Someone shouted, "Tell the truth, girl!" Tasia's shoulders sagged. She looked at me then, eyes glassy, pride leaking out of her like air from a balloon. Maybe I did learn it from you," she said finally, her voice small. "But I made it better." The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed like lightning. The host took a step forward, ready to intervene, but the judge lifted his hand. "There's no better or worse when it comes to honor," he said. "There's only right and wrong." He turned back to me, his voice low enough that only the microphones caught it. "Miss Ora Mae, would you show us the recipe card you mentioned?" I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the old index card. The edges were browned, grease spots blooming like tiny memories. My mama's cursive still danced across it, faded but proud. I held it out. The judge read silently for a moment, then looked up. "This handwriting, this story, it's older than this competition itself." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. One camera zoomed in on my hands. Another caught Tasia wiping a tear from her cheek. The judge laid the card on the table carefully, as if it were fragile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the crowd, "truth, just like good pie, can't stay hidden forever." Applause broke out, soft at first, then building, rolling through the hall like thunder in summer. I didn't move. My throat tightened. My eyes stung. Tasia stood frozen. For a moment she looked like she might say something more, but instead she turned, gathered her things, and walked off stage. The cameras followed her until she disappeared behind the curtain. The head judge smiled gently at me. "Miss Ora Mae, you've reminded us all what real heritage tastes like. Thank you." He didn't announce winners, not yet. The judges huddled again, whispering. The audience kept clapping, but the sound began to blur around me. My legs felt like they might give. Aunt Shine's voice echoed in my memory, steady and proud. "Mercy's still yours, May. Don't let anger steal it." When the applause faded, the host returned to the mic, nervous but smiling. "Well, folks, seems we have a surprise in store. The judges have decided to deliberate once more before naming our winner, so don't go anywhere." He winked at the cameras, but his voice trembled with excitement. I stepped back from the stage lights, found a quiet corner near the curtain. The scent of cinnamon still clung to my hands. I rubbed my fingers together, watching the dust of sugar catch the light. I felt something strange, peace mixed with power. For the first time I wasn't invisible. I could hear whispers spreading through the audience. "She taught her that recipe? Did you see her card? And that's integrity right there." My heart beat slow and heavy. I knew, deep down, that the outcome didn't even matter anymore. I'd already won something Tasia couldn't steal, my voice back. Then, from behind me, I heard someone call my name. I turned. Mr. Harmon, one of the assistant judges, stepped forward, holding the old recipe card between careful fingers. "Miss Ora Mae," he said, "truth has flavor. You can taste it even after the meal's done." I smiled, small and shaky. "Yes, sir, I reckon you can." He nodded once, returned the card, and said softly, "You might want to stay close. I think the next thing they say is going to change everything." And just like that, the tension returned. The judge's door creaked open again. The crowd hushed. Cameras adjusted focus. The head judge carried a single envelope in his hand, the seal still unbroken. He stepped to the center of the stage, voice solemn. "In all my years judging competitions," he said, "I have never seen a day like this one. Sometimes truth doesn't just decide the winner, it changes the rules." He paused, looking first at the audience, then at me. "Miss Ora Mae," he said slowly, "the judges have one more question for you before we announce the final result." The hall went dead silent. I could hear the ticking of the stage clock, the click of a camera shutter far off. He smiled faintly, almost kindly. "Would you be willing to tell us," he said, "what mercy really means?" And right there, under lights bright enough to make me squint, with the whole town waiting on my words, I knew that what came next would decide everything. When I think back to the weeks before that day, I can almost smell the sweet calm of my kitchen before all the noise began. Mornings came soft back then, with sunlight pouring through the lace curtains, dust floating in the air like sugar. The world outside might have been loud, but inside that little kitchen, I found peace in simple things. The sound of the whisk against a glass bowl, the hum of an old radio, the smell of pie crust baking its way into memory. I was working mornings at the diner down on Peachtree and evenings back home, baking whatever orders I could fit between tired bones. Some weeks I didn't sell a single pie, but I kept baking anyway. Mama used to say, "If you stop doing what you love just 'cause nobody's watching, you don't love it as much as you thought." So I baked for love, not applause. I'd come home, kick off my shoes, tie that old floral apron around my waist, and just be. Marcus was about 12 then, long-limbed and curious, always running his mouth about wanting to be an inventor. Joylene was still little, forever tugging at my skirt, asking if she could help stir. Our kitchen was cluttered. Flour bags by the door, stacks of bowls, a chipped blue timer that ticked too loud. Poor, yes, but warm. That kind of poor that still had pride. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I first met her. Tatia Rose. She came by after church choir practice, all smiles and perfume, holding a little notebook, like it was a Bible. Said she'd heard from one of the deacons that I made the best pies in the county. I laughed, thinking she was exaggerating, but there was something shiny about her. Ambition, maybe, or hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Miss Ora Mae," she said, brushing a braid behind her ear. "I been dreaming about entering the regional taste fest. But Lord knows I ain't got no secret recipe. You think you could maybe show me a few tricks?" I remember wiping my hands on my apron and studying her face. She was polite, pretty, just a little too polished for our side of town, but her voice had that southern sweetness that disarms you. So I smiled. "Sure, baby. Come by this Saturday. We'll start with the crust. It's where every story begins." That Saturday she came early, bringing her own measuring cups and a small camera. Said she liked to take pictures, to remember steps. I didn't think much of it then. I was just happy to have company. Baking can be lonely work, and I liked seeing somebody younger taking interest. We rolled dough together, talked about her job at the boutique, her dreams of owning a bakery. Every time I told her a trick, she'd write it down fast, lips moving as she repeated my words like she was memorizing scripture. "Why you call it Sunday mercy pie?" she asked once, watching me stir the filling. I smiled. "'Cause mercy's like sugar, baby. It sweetens what bitterness can't." She laughed, said she loved that. Said it'd make a fine story if she ever opened her own shop. She came back 3 more times that month. Each visit, she'd ask a little deeper. "How much nutmeg you use exactly? You bake on top or middle rack? What makes the crust shiny like that?" I answered without guard, thinking she just wanted to learn. I even handed her mama's old recipe card once, told her to copy it down while I checked on Marcus's homework. When I came back, she'd finished copying, neat handwriting, eyes wide with thanks. "You're a treasure, Miss Ora Mae," she said, smiling like sunlight. "This means the world to me." I felt proud, foolishly proud. It felt good being seen, being needed. But later that night, Aunt Shine called. She'd seen Tatia leaving my house, notebook clutched to her chest. "May," she said, voice firm, "you best not be giving away all your secrets. Some folks don't come to learn, they come to take." I chuckled, trying to brush it off. "She's just a girl trying to make something of herself, Shine. I'm just helping." Aunt Shine sighed. Helping's fine, long as you remember generosity and foolishness wear the same face if you don't look close. I didn't want to hear that, not then. My heart's always been soft where ambition meets kindness. The next week, Tasha didn't show. Then another week passed. I figured maybe she lost interest. I went back to baking alone, humming to the radio, folding dough the way Mama taught me. Slow, patient, thankful. Life went quiet again. Until one Friday evening I saw her picture. I'd stopped at the grocery store after work, and near the bulletin board by the entrance, there it was, a glossy flyer for the regional Taste Fest. The headline said, "Local talent shines bright. Tasha rose to compete with her original family recipe, Sunday Mercy Pie." My stomach dropped. I blinked, reading the words again. Original family recipe. I felt heat rush to my face, like I'd been slapped by the very kindness I'd given. People were walking by, smiling at the flyer, saying, "That girl sure can bake." And I just stood there, bag of sugar in one hand, heartbreaking in the other. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long after the children were in bed, staring at Mama's recipe card. I ran my fingers over her handwriting, felt the grease spots like they were scars. I thought about Tasha's laughter, her camera clicking while I rolled dough, the way she'd nodded when I said mercy should taste sweet. And I whispered to the air, "You took more than a recipe, baby. You took my mother's breath." The next morning, Aunt Shine came by without knocking. She had that knowing look on her face before I even showed her the flyer. She said, tapping the paper. "I warned you, May. Pretty manners don't mean pure motives." I dropped the flyer on the counter. She used my mama's name, the same name. Aunt Shine crossed her arms. "And you gon' let her?" "I don't know what I can do," I said quietly. "Ain't like anybody gonna believe me over her." Shine leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Then you make them believe. You show up. You bake your truth next to hers. You let the taste tell the story." I looked down at my hands, the same hands that used to knead beside Mama's, the same hands I'd given freely to someone else. They were trembling now, not from anger, but from disappointment, in myself. Aunt Shine touched my shoulder. "Mercy ain't weakness, May, but don't confuse silence for grace. Grace still speaks." That was the moment something settled in me. Quiet, but steady. I wasn't going to fight her with words. I was going to let the pie speak, same way my mama did. Truth through taste. I glanced at the clock. The children were still asleep. Outside, dawn was just a thin blue thread in the sky. I tied my apron, pulled out the flour, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "All right, Mama, teach me again." The first light of morning crept through the curtains, pale and gentle like a question that hadn't yet been answered. I mixed flour, butter, and sugar with a kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. Each turn of the spoon steadied my breath. I wasn't angry, not really. Anger burns too fast. What I felt was heavier, a need to reclaim something that had almost been erased. By the time Marcus came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and purpose. "Mama, you baking already?" he mumbled, grinning through his sleep. I said, sliding a pie into the oven, just reminding myself what love tastes like. He yawned, nodding like he understood. Children always do, in their quiet way. That weekend, I called the Taste Fest committee. My voice shook a little when I asked if it was too late to register. The woman on the phone said I had one day left before the deadline. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there holding the receiver, heart pounding like a drum under my ribs. For years, I'd baked for others, church potlucks, funerals, birthdays, but never for glory. Competitions were for folks with nicer ovens and confidence I hadn't owned since my husband left. But this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about truth. The next few days blurred together. I worked the diner by day, prepped ingredients at night. My tiny kitchen turned into a battlefield of bowls and sugar dust. Marcus helped stir, Joylene sang to the radio, and I felt Mama's presence everywhere, in the hum of the fridge, in the shine on the counter, in the rhythm of my heartbeat keeping time with hers. Then came the knock, Late evening, when the kitchen light was the only thing glowing on the block, I opened the door to find Tacia standing there. She looked radiant, fresh curls, a new blouse, the smell of money and perfume floating around her. "Miss Ora Mae," she said with a practiced smile, "I just came by to thank you again for teaching me. I, got accepted into the Taste Fest finals." I held her gaze, said nothing. My silence made her shift her weight. "Anyway," she added, "I'll be sure to mention how kind you were to me if anyone asks." Her tone was light, but I could hear the fence built inside it, a warning and a performance all at once. "Kindness don't need mentionin'," I said. "Truth does." Her smile faltered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Oh, you do," I replied softly. "You just ain't ready to say it out loud." For a long second we just stared at each other, me in my apron, her in her designer blouse, one woman rooted, the other floating. She finally laughed, small and brittle. "Well," she said, glancing at her nails, "may the best pie win." "Sugar," I told her, "the best pie already has." She left quick, her heels clicking against the porch like punctuation marks. I shut the door slow, the sound of her car fading into night. I leaned against the counter, felt tears come without asking permission. Not because I was hurt, but because I finally saw her clearly. Ambition wearing a smile I'd mistaken for gratitude. The next morning, I took my pie tin down from the cabinet. The old one, the one Mama used every Sunday. It was dented, thin from years of use, but it still caught the light like a memory that refuses to fade. I washed it twice, then set it in the center of the table like an altar. Aunt Shine dropped by that afternoon, hat tilted, purse swinging. "You ready, May?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." She grinned. "Good, 'cause that woman ain't ready for you." We spent the rest of the day preparing crusts, humming old gospel tunes, the kind Mama used to sing while she baked. The house smelled like strength. Even the walls seemed to lean in closer to listen. When Sunday arrived, I ironed my yellow dress and pinned my hair back under a simple green wrap. I wasn't rich, but I could still look like I believed in myself. Shine kissed my cheek, whispered, "Go on and make your Mama proud." The competition hall was bigger than I'd imagined. Glass ceiling, cameras, polished counters gleaming like mirrors. Women in bright dresses moved around with trays, men in suits adjusting their name tags. And there I was, standing in the middle of all that shine, holding my old tin pan and a paper bag of flour. People gave me polite smiles, the kind that slide off your face when you don't know where to look. But I kept my head high. I set up my little station near the back and breathed in deep. Tacia spotted me not long after. Her expression flickered. Surprise, irritation, a flash of guilt that she buried under a smooth laugh. She waved, all charm. "Didn't expect to see you here, Miss Ora Mae." "I reckon truth's got a way of showing up where it's needed," I said. She smiled again, but her eyes darted away. The host made his grand introduction, the crowd clapped, and the cameras began to roll. I could feel the hum of energy all around me. But inside, there was stillness, that quiet kind Mama used to call the peace before purpose. Flour dusted my apron like snow. The first note of gospel played faintly in my head as I began to mix, fold, and breathe. My fingers remembered what my heart never forgot. The smell rose, sweet and honest. Hours later, when they called time, I looked down at my pie cooling on the counter. It wasn't perfect. The crust was cracked near the edge. But it was mine. Every imperfection shaped by love. Then I looked across the room. Tacia's pie sat under bright lights, glossy and golden, her name already written on a tag, Tacia Rose, Sunday Mercy Pie. I felt my breath catch. Same title, same story. For a moment I almost laughed, not from humor, but disbelief. I could hear Aunt Shine's words in my head. Grace still speaks. So I whispered to myself, then let it speak. And as the judges began to circle, clipboards in hand, I folded my hands and waited. My pulse was steady now. I wasn't afraid anymore, because this time I knew exactly who I was and what belonged to me. And that's how I ended up standing under those lights, staring down the woman who tried to pass off my mama's voice as her own, waiting for the world to taste the difference. The smell hit me first, sugar, nutmeg, and pride baking together in one thick cloud that wrapped the whole hall. The Taste Fest stage lights were bright enough to make every pie shine like glass. I stood behind my table, apron neat, fingers laced in front of me. Around me, cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and the judges' shoes tapped the floor like a slow drumbeat. Tasia was 2 stations down, laughing loud, the sound bouncing off the metal counters. She had on a crisp white apron and gold hoops that caught the light each time she tossed her head. "Family tradition," she said into one of the cameras. "Been passed down for years." Her voice slid smooth as syrup, as I felt my stomach tighten. My pie sat quiet beside me, steam rising from its cracked crust. I told myself to breathe, to remember Mama's words. Truth don't need no sugar added. The host's voice boomed through the speakers. "Contestants, step back. Judges, you may begin." The crowd clapped, then hushed. 5 judges moved from table to table, forks gleaming in their hands. When they reached Tasia, she smiled like she'd already won. "This is my grandmother's Sunday mercy pie," she said proudly. "The flavor tells a story." The head judge, Mr. Harmon, though I didn't know his name yet, took a bite. He closed his eyes, savoring it. A murmur rippled through the audience. Then he frowned. He took another small bite, slower this time. "This tastes familiar," he said under his breath, but the mic caught it. Tasia laughed too quick. "Well, good taste is universal," she said. But the room had shifted. Something about his tone made folks lean forward. He moved on, still chewing, still thinking. When they reached my table, I felt my breath stop halfway in my chest. My pie looked humble beside the others, no fancy decoration, just golden crust and care. The judge sliced a piece, took a bite, and suddenly his eyes widened. He turned the fork over, looked at me, then at the pie again. "Miss," he glanced at the card in front of him. "Miss Ora Mae, what did you call this again?" "Sunday mercy pie," I said softly. The judges exchanged glances. One whispered, "Didn't she say that same name?" Meaning Taisia. I didn't flinch. "It's my mama's recipe," I said. "Been in my family longer than I've been breathing." The whispering turned into quiet talk. Cameras inched closer. The hum of electricity filled the silence. I saw Tasia shift at her station, pretending not to hear. Mr. Harmon set down his fork. "Excuse me, Miss Rose," he called. "Would you join us for a moment?" She froze, then walked over, smile stretched too tight. "Of course, sir." He gestured toward the 2 pies side by side. "Would you mind explaining why these taste almost identical?" Her laugh cracked a little. "Coincidence, I guess. Great minds think alike." The audience chuckled nervously. He leaned in. "Coincidence can't explain handwriting, child. We found an old entry in the Taste Fest archives from 1997. Same name, same description. Belonged to a woman named Ora Mae Johnson. That you, ma'am?" "Yes, sir," I said. My voice didn't shake. A ripple of sound moved through the hall. Tasia blinked, trying to keep her composure. "Maybe it's a common name. You know, church recipes travel." I could feel Aunt Shine's gaze from the crowd, steady, rooting me in place. Mr. Harmon smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "Maybe. Or maybe somebody took more than a taste." Tasia's hands twitched. I don't know what you're implying." I looked at her, not with anger, but with something firmer. "You know exactly what he's implying. You sat in my kitchen 3 months ago, writing down every word my mama ever taught me. You said it was for practice." The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Lord have mercy." Her lips parted, no sound coming out. I stepped closer to the table, voice still low. "I gave you my kindness. You gave me betrayal wrapped in a pretty bow." She tried to laugh again, but her voice broke. "You can't prove that." "Oh, but I can." I reached into my apron and pulled out the recipe card. The paper was soft and brown at the edges, the ink faded but clear. Mama's handwriting danced across it, the same cursive curves you couldn't fake if you tried. Gasps filled the hall as I laid it gently on the table between us. "This card's been in my family since before you were born," I said. "There's flour from my mama's hands still pressed in them creases." Tasha stared at it, eyes darting like a cornered bird. Mr. Harmon lifted the card carefully, studying the faded script. "Mercy pie," he read aloud, "made only with love that forgives." He looked at her. "Miss Rose, you copied this exactly, didn't you?" Her face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The cameras zoomed in. Reporters scribbled notes. The hum of whispers turned into a storm of noise. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't mean no harm." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You meant to win, and maybe that felt the same to you." The host tried to step in, but the room was already alive with judgment and disbelief. Mr. Harmon motioned for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give these women a moment." The crowd quieted again. I could feel every heartbeat in the room, heavy and expectant. Tasha looked at me, tears forming, but pride still holding the corners of her mouth. "I was just trying to make something of myself," she said. I nodded slowly. "I know that hunger, baby, but you don't feed it by stealing someone else's meal." The hall went still again. Mr. Harmon sighed, setting the card down with reverence. "Truth's got its own flavor," he murmured, "and I believe we all just tasted it." The applause came soft, hesitant, like rain after a long drought. I didn't smile. My hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from release. For years, I'd let people talk over me, take credit for my labor, my love, my lineage. But standing there under those bright lights, I finally understood, truth don't shout. It just waits for its moment to be heard. Tasha's tears came slow at first, quiet and uncertain, like she didn't know if she was supposed to cry or pose. The cameras stayed fixed on her face, and I could see her weighing every movement. Then her shoulders dropped, pride crumbling like overbaked crust. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have done it. I wanted people to see me the way they see you." The crowd hushed. You could hear the hum of the lights above us. I wanted to be angry. Heaven knows I did. But standing there, watching that girl unravel under the same lights that once blinded me, all I felt was tired. Tired and a little sad, because I knew what it meant to want more than what the world gives you. "You didn't have to steal my mama's name to shine," I said gently. "You just had to bake your own truth." She wiped her cheeks, smudging her makeup, shaking her head. "I thought if I made it big, I could tell everybody later where it came from. I was going to give you credit, really." I smiled, small and bitter. "Credit's what you give a stranger, baby. Family deserves respect." Mr. Harmon cleared his throat. "Miss Rose, you understand the seriousness of this, yes?" She nodded, voice gone small. "Yes, sir." The head judge leaned toward me. "Miss Ora Mae, do you wish to press a formal complaint?" I looked out at the audience, neighbors, church folk, old customers from the diner, all watching like the next word I spoke would decide how they felt about the world. "No, sir," I said at last. "What's done is done. I just want my mama's story to stand on its own 2 feet again." A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. Some people clapped softly, others wiped their eyes. Mr. Harmon nodded. "Then let the record show. Truth has been restored." He turned to the other judges. "I think we've heard enough." They gathered their clipboards, whispering, pencils scratching quick. The air thickened again, the kind that comes before thunder. I stood still, hands folded, eyes on the pie that had carried 3 generations of mercy in its crust. Tasha turned to me, voice trembling. "You're better than me." I shook my head. "No, child. I just remembered who I was before the lights came on." The head judge tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the decision is unanimous." Silence. Every person in that hall leaned forward. "In recognition of integrity, heritage, and authenticity," he said, "this year's Taste Fest honors Miss Ora Mae Johnson as the recipient of the Legacy Award. Her dish will be archived permanently as a symbol of Southern tradition and truth. The applause broke like a storm, hands clapping, feet stomping, a few people shouting, "Amen!" in the back. I blinked hard, trying not to let the tears spill. Tasha stood frozen beside me, lost in the noise. I reached out, touched her arm lightly. "Keep baking," I whispered. "Just bake what's yours." She looked at me through the blur of tears and nodded once, then slipped off stage, swallowed by the crowd. When the host handed me the plaque, my hands shook. It wasn't heavy, just unfamiliar. All I could think about was Mama's voice. "Mercy always rises on Sunday." I looked out over the crowd, the cameras flashing, the lights gleaming off the tin pie pan beside me. "This ain't about trophies," I said softly. "It's about remembering the people who fed us when we were too hungry to feed ourselves." The crowd quieted again, listening. My words hung in the air like smoke curling from an old oven. Mr. Harmon smiled, eyes kind. "Well said, Miss Ora Mae. The truth sure do have flavor." I laughed through a tear. "Yes, sir, and it tastes like peace." The applause rose once more, long and rolling. Then the music swelled, the lights dimmed, and for a heartbeat, everything slowed, the glitter, the noise, the movement. All I saw was that old recipe card resting safe in my pocket, warm against my heart. I had walked into that hall with nothing but a pie tin and a prayer. I was walking out with my mother's voice returned to me, whole again. As I stepped off the stage, the doors at the back opened wide, letting in the late afternoon sun. It poured across the floor, golden and forgiving. I felt it on my skin, soft as grace. That's when I knew some recipes don't just feed you, they free you. The day after the Taste Fest, the world felt different and exactly the same. Sunlight came through my window just like it always did. But the quiet had a new kind of weight to it, the kind that settles in after a storm has passed. The apron I'd worn still hung on the kitchen chair, crusted with flour and pride. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I just sat there at the table, holding my coffee cup with both hands, letting the steam touch my face like forgiveness. Marcus came running in, waving the morning newspaper. "Mama, look! You in the paper! Right here, look!" He pointed at the photo. Me standing on stage, head slightly bowed, pie tin beside me, that same quiet smile I didn't even know I was wearing. The headline read, "Local Woman Wins Legacy Award After Recipe Scandal." I sighed. Lord, they make it sound like a war. Marcus grinned. "You won, didn't you?" "I did," I said softly. "But baby, sometimes winning don't feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like truth finally exhaled." The phone rang 3 times before I picked it up. Reporters, producers, even a local morning show asking if I'd come talk about the scandal. I turned them all down. I wasn't interested in fame. I just wanted my peace. Fame's like salt. A little gives flavor. Too much dries you out. By noon, Aunt Shine showed up wearing her Sunday hat, even though it was only Tuesday. "You sitting here alone?" she said, hands on her hips. "You supposed to be celebrating." I laughed. "I'm resting." Resting looks a whole lot like worrying," she said, sitting across from me. "What's bothering you?" I took a slow breath. I keep seeing her face shine. That girl looks so lost. "Lost don't mean innocent," she said. "You gave her grace. Now let the Lord handle the rest." I smiled faintly. "Grace sure do weigh heavy." Shine leaned in. "So does bitterness. Pick the one you can carry longer." The screen door creaked, and before I could answer, a soft knock came. Shine raised an eyebrow. "You expecting company?" I shook my head. When I opened the door, there she was, Tasha. No makeup this time, no perfect curls, no fancy blouse, just jeans, a plain t-shirt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept since the festival. She held something small in her hands. "Miss Ora Mae," she said quietly, "can I come in for a minute?" Aunt Shine crossed her arms but didn't move. "I'll be in the living room," she said, walking away slow but listening close. I stepped aside. "Come on in." She sat at the kitchen table staring at her hands. "I don't know how to make this right," she said. "Start with truth," I said. She nodded. "I told the paper it was yours. The real story. I sent them your name for their records." "That's good," I said, sipping my coffee. "But that ain't why you came, is it?" Her eyes filled again. "No, ma'am. I came because I didn't just take your recipe. I took your faith in people, and I hate myself for that." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The anger I'd felt that day had cooled into something sad and still. "You can't steal what the Lord keeps safe," I said finally. "You just bruised it a little." She laughed through a tear. "You're too good to me." I shook my head. "No, I'm just tired of being angry. My mama always said, 'Don't let other folks' wrongs make you forget your own right.'" She reached across the table and slid something toward me, a small box tied with ribbon. "I made this for you," she said. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a pie slice, tiny and delicate. "To remind you of what's yours," she whispered. I smiled. "Thank you, baby, but you keep it. You need reminding more than I do." Tasha nodded, eyes shining. "Maybe I do." She stood, hesitated. "I'm leaving town for a while, gonna visit my mama in Atlanta. Figure out who I am without pretending." "Good," I said softly. "Find your own flavor." When she left, the house felt lighter. Aunt Shine peeked back in, smirking. "Well, I'll be. You gave her mercy again." "Mama raised me that way," I said. Maybe too well." We both laughed. It felt good, real good. That evening, just as the sun dipped low, there was another knock. This time, it was Mr. Harmon. Still in his pressed slacks and plaid shirt, hat in hand, smile easy. "Miss Ora Mae," he said. "I was in the neighborhood and figured I'd check on the best baker in the county." I chuckled. "You sure that's not a conflict of interest, Judge?" He laughed, deep and warm. "I already ruled on your pie. Now I'm just checking on the woman behind it." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note for the woman who reminded us what truth tastes like. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded. "You know, when I first tasted that pie, I thought of my own mama. Been gone 20 years, but I swear I heard her humming." "Funny how food does that," I said. "Brings ghosts to dinner without scaring nobody." He smiled. "You plan to enter again next year?" I shook my head. "I think I'll just teach, pass it on the right way." "That's a good kind of legacy," he said. "Mind if I stop by sometimes, maybe learn a trick or two?" I laughed. "Long as you don't steal my recipe." He grinned. "No, ma'am, I just want to earn a slice." We talked till dusk, the kitchen warm with laughter. When he left, the street lamps flickered on, and the world outside looked softer somehow, like it had exhaled too. I stood by the window, pendant still on the table, recipe card beside it, both catching the lamplight. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not from people, but from the weight of proving myself to them. Mama used to say, "The truth don't fight to be believed, it just waits to be lived." And that night, as I blew out the candle on the counter, I knew I was finally living it. 2 days later, the whole town felt like it was humming my name. At the diner, folks stopped me between tables, patting my arm, whispering, "We proud of you, Miss May." Even the manager, who'd barely noticed me before, told customers, "That woman right there? She's a legend now." I smiled, thanked them, kept pouring coffee. Fame still felt like somebody else's coat, pretty, but not made for me. After my shift, I walked home past the little grocery. My picture was taped to the window beside the Taste Fest flyer, the same one that once carried Tasha's smile. Only now the caption read, "Local baker, honored for preserving tradition." I stood there a long while, watching the glass fog with my breath. The reflection looking back at me didn't look victorious. She looked peaceful. Older maybe, but lighter too. Inside the house, Marcus and Joylene had turned the kitchen into their own experiment lab, flour everywhere, bowls stacked high. "We makin' mercy pie," Joylene shouted. "Without burnin' it this time," Marcus added. I laughed so hard my eyes watered. "Lord help us all." We baked together till the sun dipped low, the smell of cinnamon filling every corner of that little house. It wasn't perfect. Joylene spilled sugar, Marcus forgot the nutmeg, but it was ours. The real thing. Later that week, the church held a potluck. I hadn't planned to go, but Aunt Shine wouldn't take no. "You gotta show that face, May," she said. "They need to see Grace in motion." So I wore my good dress, soft green cotton, hair wrapped in a gold scarf, and carried 2 pies. When I walked in, folks clapped. Somebody started singing a verse of "His Eye is on the Sparrow," and the whole room joined in. I tried to wave it off, but my throat caught. Reverend Coleman took my hand. "Sister Ora Mae," he said, "you turned temptation into testimony. That's ministry work right there." I smiled. All I did was tell the truth. He grinned. "That's usually the hardest job." Across the room I spotted Tashia. She'd come back after her trip, sitting quiet near the punch table, eyes low. When the music faded, she walked over, holding a plate. "I baked," she said shyly. "Peach crumble, my own recipe this time." I took a bite, sweet, a little tart. "It's good," I told her. "Got your fingerprint in it?" She smiled for real then, small but honest. For the first time, I saw the woman she might yet become. When the evening ended, Mr. Harmon offered me a ride home. We drove slow through town, windows down, summer air thick with honeysuckle. He talked about starting a community baking class for the youth center, asked if I'd teach. I laughed. "Judge, I barely taught myself." "That's why they'll listen," he said. "They'll see you ain't perfect, just persistent." We stopped in front of my porch. The night was humming with crickets. He hesitated before tipping his hat. "Miss May, that pie of yours, it reminded us what honesty tastes like. Don't let the world make you doubt its sweetness." I nodded, smiling at the ground. "I won't, long as I got folks like you reminding me." He chuckled, then drove off slow, taillights fading into the dark. I sat on the porch a while, shoes off, feet cooling on the wooden boards. The sky was velvet black, stars scattered like spilled sugar. In the distance, laughter from the church still floated on the air. I thought about Mama, about all the women before me who'd cooked truth into silence and called it supper. I whispered, "We did it, Mama." Inside, the kitchen lamp glowed soft over the old recipe card framed on the wall. Next to it hung the Taste Fest plaque. 2 pieces of my story, one written in ink, the other in experience. I looked at them both and felt something settle in my chest. Not pride exactly, more like closure mixed with gratitude. That night I dreamed of dough under my hands, the table warm with light. Mama was there, humming the same hymn she used to sing while the pies baked. She leaned over, kissed my forehead, and said, "Told you mercy always rises, baby." When I woke, the morning air was cool, the sky pink with promise. The world felt new again, not because anything changed, but because I had. Truth had done its work. Mercy had done hers. Morning light slides through my kitchen window like a familiar friend. The world's gone still again. No reporters, no whispers, no crowds, just the low hum of the fridge and the smell of coffee. My life looks the same as it did before all that noise, but I ain't the same woman stirring this cup. Something in me settled, like dough that's finally risen. The plaque from the Taste Fest sits on the shelf above Mama's old recipe card. I dust it sometimes, not to shine it, just to remember that truth can stand proud without shouting. Marcus and Joylene come running in before school, grabbing toast, laughing too loud. "Mama, you gonna bake tonight?" they ask. "Maybe," I tell them, smiling. "Maybe not a pie this time, maybe something new." After they leave, I tie on my apron, the green one with the little sunflower stitched in the corner. The fabric's worn soft from years of use. I roll out dough slow, listening to the morning news in the background, half smiling when the announcer mentions local culinary hero Ora Mae Johnson. I whisper, "Hero's too big a word. I'm just somebody who remembered where flavor comes from." Around noon, Aunt Shine stops by with fresh peaches. "For your next masterpiece," she says. I laugh. "Mercy, woman, I'm still recovering." She eyes the counter. "You know they talking about putting your recipe in a museum display?" I blink. Museum for what? For history, she says, for women who fed folks and never got thanked out loud. That hits deep. I lean against the counter, thinking about Mama, about every pair of brown hands that made something sweet out of almost nothing. That evening, Mr. Harmon comes by again. He brings a basket of apples and 2 cups from the diner. Thought we could share dessert in quiet, he says. We sit on the porch, watching the sky turn honey orange. The air smells like baked fruit and grass after rain. He looks out at the sunset. Funny thing about truth, he says. Once it's out, the whole town breathes easier. Maybe so, I answer. I sure can. He chuckles. You ever think about writing these stories down? I smile. I'm better at telling them. Words sound truer when they travel through breath. Well then, keep talking, he says softly. We fall quiet again, and that silence feels like peace, not absence. When he leaves, I stay out there, rocking slow, the night rolling and gentle. Somewhere a choir practices down the street. I hum along, same old hymn Mama used to sing, His mercy endureth forever. Inside, I pour myself a glass of sweet tea and stand by the window. The streetlights shimmer, and I catch my reflection in the glass, older, stronger, softer. I whisper, "You did good, girl. You finally stood for yourself." Then I laugh because Mama would have said, "Took you long enough." I pick up the framed recipe card one more time, trace the handwriting with my thumb. The ink is fading, but the story's brighter than ever. I set it back and turn to the camera, smiling easy, voice low and sure. If you're still with me, I say, you're gonna want to hear this part. See, life's like a recipe. You can lend it, share it, even forget it for a while. But the flavor that's truly yours, nobody can steal that. I pause, letting the silence settle like sugar on warm crust. I tell real stories like this one. If they move you, if they taste like truth, subscribe to Tales of Ora Mae, and tell me in the comments, what would you do in my place?